I think we can go ahead and get started. I'm Katie O'Brien with Well Health, and welcome to the Well Health webinar, Digital Transformation Post-COVID, What's Next on the CIO Priority List. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent within the next few days. Feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout today's webinar in the question section of the control panel. We will answer as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If we don't get to your questions, we will reach out to you directly through email. You'll also have opportunities to answer a few poll questions. Be on the lookout for the pop-up polls throughout the presentation. Your feedback is very appreciated. All right, and now for the main event. Today, we will talk to CIO leaders about their shifting responsibilities, priorities, and key challenges, which have been largely revised by the pandemic, as well as rising patient expectations. Our guests today are Sue Schade from StarBridge Advisors, a health IT advisory firm. Sue has more than 30 years of experience in healthcare information technology management. In recent years, she served as interim CIO at Boston Children's Hospital, Stony Brook Medicine on Long Island, and University Hospitals in Cleveland. Prior to that, she served as CIO at the University of Michigan Hospitals and Health Centers and Brigham and Women's Hospital. From AltaMed Health Services is Senior Vice President and CIO Raymond Lowe. Ray is a skilled IT leader focused on strategic and innovative approaches to solving complex business and IT challenges. He has previously served in leadership roles at Dignity Health, Providence Health and Services, and Kaiser Permanente. Our third guest is Joel Vengco, Senior Vice President and Chief Information and Digital Officer at Hartford HealthCare. Before joining Hartford, Joel held the same position at Bay State Health. He also has previous executive leadership experience at GE Healthcare, Boston Medical Center, and Partners Healthcare System. Our host and moderator today is Meg Aranow, the Senior Vice President Platform Evangelist at Well Health. Before joining Well, Meg served as CEO for Adaris Health and Senior Research Director with Advisory Board's Information Technology Strategy Council. She also was Vice President and CIO for Boston Medical Center for over a decade. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Meg.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you to our panelists for joining today. One of the super fun things that I get to do at Well Health is to just think largely and broadly and engage and make sure that we are good corporate citizens, kind of moving the agenda forward at all stops. This today may be a first in that we have 3 guest panelists, none of whom are Well customers. So for those of you who are listening, if you're worried this is a Well commercial, it absolutely is not. We're here to just sort of think and explore. We know that CIOs and others are so busy that it's hard to just take a moment and sit back and actually gather your thoughts and try to think a little bit more about some of the horizon issues. So we're happy that you're joining with us today to take at least a few minutes to do that. So with that, I'm going to kick it off. As I was preparing for this, I thought we have heard so much over the last few years about how the CIO role is changing. And it's getting segmented, and there's the chief data officer and a chief analytics officer and an innovation officer and a transformation officer. I want to just seed that question. I think we've asked it like 4,000 times already. So let's just say, yep, that happened. Okay. So my question for you all to consider is, so what does that mean? So now that you've divided what maybe was yourself 10 years ago into 4 different personas, and 4 different people, how do you coordinate? How do you keep everything moving in the same direction? And I think, Sue, I think I'm going to start with you. I didn't tee you up in advance, so I hope that's not a shock, but you've probably seen more health entities than we have in your consulting role over the last 10 years or so. So you've probably got a good perspective on how different organizations are doing this.
Yes, great, and thanks, Meg, and great to be here. Yeah, in the last 10 years, since 12 when I left Brigham, I have been in 5 different organizations, including 4 of them as interim. And, you know, the roles just continue to bifurcate and be added. I'm looking forward to what Joel and Ray have to say on this in terms of their current roles. My most recent interim CIO role was at Boston Children's Hospital, and there was a chief innovation officer and a chief information officer, which was me. And, you know, what I would emphasize is the importance of partnership. and that whatever you do, whatever the people in the other roles are doing, it's for the good of the organization, and to not feel threatened, which I think is often the case. It's like, well, if they get that piece of the pie and I don't, and I want more of the pie, it's not about who has what so much as what's the best thing for us to do as for the organization, and to really nurture and build those relationships and work that out very openly. And I think, we're going to continue to see this evolve. The other thing is how broad and how many roles the CIO can take on. Joel, you obviously have a digital and a CIO role. That makes a lot of sense. And I think it just varies by organization and individual. How much can they take on? How much are they ready to take on? What does the organization think that they need?
Yeah, good, great insight for that. And so, Joel, you just got called out. What do you have to say about that?
Joel's turn.
Thank you. Thanks, Sue. And thanks, Meg. Great to be here. I agree with what Sue has said. I think a lot of it too is about, there's a lot of change management that occurs that's got to be a part of the work, and change management means really focusing on culture. And so, there's no longer, the kind of, hiding behind the server, if you will. You can't really do, not that we ever did, but really much more than ever, we have to be out there collaborating, co-creating. And so, I think there's a lot of culture in the work that we do, lots of change management. There's still a focus on operational leadership, and there's still a lot of work to be done to be brilliant with the basics. So that's not, off our plate. But we're asked to do things that really are moving the organization to work differently. And so however we decide to define digital in this call, it's really about changing the way that we deliver care and engage with patients. It just happens that we are at the forefront of a digital transformation, or the fourth industrial movement, or whatever you want to call it. And I think as the CIDO, the CIDOO, whatever it is, we are squarely in the middle of that transformation. So culture, organizational development, operational modeling, those things are part of our job now. And it's not that we are the core leader or the center of it. We're actually a facilitator, a collaborator, just like Sue. So I think that's really where we are today as a CIO.
So Ray, I have a feeling that you're doing a lot of those jobs, if not all of those jobs, all rolled into one, but you're at a little different organization. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we are. So I agree with everything my co-speaker said as well. If you go back 10 years ago, a lot of the CIO role would have been more kind of back office, to Joel's point, the server, the data center, the cybersecurity, all of those around. And then we went through the EHR era. We all went through it. We all became application specialists. Then we hit the pandemic, right? And now we need to be sensitive to people's needs, pivoting organizations. Televideo visits were nice to have. Now they're commonplace. We don't even talk about it as being a differentiator. It's just expected in terms of what is happening around there. And Joel and I are friends. We've spoken before, and I think we both shared some information with Becker's, and Becker's did a little piece that talked about the COO by proxy. The CIOs today, we understand the systems, we understand how they come together. We understand the intricacies. We also understand the opportunities, all right? And when you look at any type of solution, it's really 85% people and about 15% technology and process workflow in terms of that around there. So I kind of say the new CIO role can be defined with the number of I's: the information officer, the innovation officer, the informatics officer, and then there's the influence, which is the partnership that my co-pants are also talking about. And you kind of have to balance how your advocacy, inquiry, and listening and strategies and aligning it with those different eyes, to be pretty effective.
Hey, Meg, if I might, I know this is going to come off kind of interesting and maybe not right, but so I have a small chat with some small group of CIOs, and some of us have CIDO roles, some of us have CIOO roles. And so then we started to put the letters together, and it came out to CIDIOT, and we're like, Cidiots, Anyway,
that's good. That's good.
Lots of titles.
Perfect.
I love it. Meg, if I could, on a more serious note, add one other aspect to this, because we can talk as leaders about partnering with those other leadership roles, but we can't forget the IT staff. And oftentimes it's the IT staff that are feeling threatened and frustrated. You know, it's like, okay, the innovation people are doing all these things over here, and then they just throw it over the wall to us when they want it in production. And you know, some of those folks in IT may want to move into that innovation space. And how do you make sure from a cultural perspective that roles are clear, groups are working together effectively and not threatened, again, for the greater good of the organization. So I think it's really important to be sensitive to how staff are feeling about these evolving changes in leadership roles.
Yeah, Sue, I'll just build away. Sue, you are so spot on, right? I think it's incumbent upon us as, you know, people, and, you know, with the Great Resignation, that we have to create the culture of learning.
Right.
I mean, often we all, IT folks, we're the unsung heroes. We're like the phone company. We get called when there's a problem. We're not necessarily praised unless it's like a big go live around there. But, you know, we have the ability to, you know, influence and drive what's happening from a technology perspective. And we can grow staff from a help desk into a network, into an application, into a training, into a project perspective around there. And I think the environments that we create, you know, that culture of learning, the culture of positivity, and then kind of connecting it to the mission, why we're all in healthcare, really makes it a very, you know, special world that we live in.
Yeah, it's a great point, especially as everybody's so hungry for staff. Although I'm sure you're all reading the same things I am, right? So maybe the labor market's changing a little now, but it certainly has been really tough.
It's not.
And so now we're fighting ourselves, right, for staff. So yeah, it's a great point, actually. I appreciate that. In listening to you, it's clear to me why my colleagues in Well are often asking me, like, well, who is my buyer of this? Because there are lots of different angles now to come into these organizations. It is interesting for sure. So with any one of those hats, let me ask, so as we're entering, I don't want to say we're coming out of the pandemic, we're entering a new phase. What's your short list? You've got, you know, if you look out over the next 12 to 24 months, are there absolute must-haves that are your North Star for guiding your organizations? Ray, why don't I start with you?
Okay, sure. Well, thank you. So we are a Medicaid provider, which means we serve the low income, underserved, many folks that don't speak English in there. So it's a different type of payer market. And what we really did through the pandemic is we changed how access was provided. You know, we kind of closed the health equity gap around there by providing video visits, which some people would say, well, it's kind of commonplace. But when you look at the underserved and low income, they would have to go to a clinic or they would get their care in the ED, right? So we've kind of really closed the health equity gap around there. And now we have a real, you know, a much stronger focus on the quality and the quality outcomes, right? And looking at the value-based care, right? The preventative measures that we need for outreach, which now takes us to patient engagement. And so how do we, again, enable an underserved low-income population with patient engagement strategies, you know, through omni-channel, multi-channel, multiple languages that they understand and that they're not afraid, you know, to utilize it. So patient experience, you know, is a very big area we're looking at as well. Quality, of course, the underpinning of all of this is data alignment, data integration. We can all talk about that. And of course, in another area again is looking again and making sure that we're always cyber vigilant, because we do not want anything nefarious to happen to our corporations by any means or any of our patient data.
Yeah, great point. Security is always a hot topic, right? Security and privacy. Joel, any comments on that? Your next 24 months? I know you just landed in your new job, so may not be clear yet, but give it a shot.
I'm a little bit in a different situation, but you know, there are commonalities to what I was doing at Bay State for sure. But really, in the next 24 months, I'd say one of the first things that are sort of top of mind is really looking at my operating model, the IT operating model. And what I mean by that is that you know, the last administration, the one that I'm inheriting all of this great work from, and I think this is where we are in many instances. The foundation has been laid, and you've got an EHR. Things are starting to be digitized more and more, and so it really is a very different, you know, situation that I'm walking into. Data is in the system somewhere. You know, capabilities that that we didn't have, and they were more analog before, now digital. And so it's really rationalizing those things and creating, number one, you know, an IT organization that has a model that can support that, but also bring it to the next level, which is really the other piece of this, is that, you know, how do I begin to sort of think about those assets and form a data and digital strategy that really supports our vision of the future. And Hartford HealthCare's vision of the future is being the partner in personalized, coordinated care. And to me, that's a really specific and really tremendous vision to latch a lot of these things that I believe are going to be part of my strategic agenda on. And so that is going to be the basis on top of which I'm going to build things like our digital agenda, our analytics capabilities, the way that we engage with our consumers, and really ultimately, how do we transform the way that we do work at our health system, which is 10 hospitals across the state of Connecticut. How do we transform the way that we do work so we can engage with folks, you know, in their homes? You know, we have this saying where right now, strategically, they put sites across Connecticut that that are essentially 10 miles away from every resident in Connecticut. That was sort of the strategy 6 or 7 years ago. So now the CEO says, well, I want the strategy to be 0 miles. So we have to begin the home, and so that's kind of what we're going to be building towards.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, you know, Ray talked about patient engagement. You talked about personalized medicine, hospital at home or care at home. So I'll take a little tangent and say I have to ask, because it's the business of well, so it's my focus. I'll be selfish for a minute and ask: is the path to patient engagement clear? Are we that are in the patient engagement business? Are we overthinking it? Are we making it harder than it needs to be?
Since I teed it up, I'll take that. Okay, so okay. I love live meetings, right? Because you're challenging us. You know, I think it's a constantly evolving opportunity, right? In terms of how we engage the patient and where we engage the patient. I mean, Joel very eloquently kind of talked about the flexible walls of medicine in there, and you know, the zero base in there, which I think we all strive to. But I think kind of the patient engagement strategy, you know, the underlying technology, I think is fairly well defined. But I think it's in terms of the messaging and the messaging to the patient, so that we've made it easy for them, right? That they get the call to action, right? So, for instance, if we do a quality outreach program, you know, and we're doing colorectal screening, right? So it's time for your exams around there, and you send out messages to your folks who population health management quality tools as a reminder, right? But do we just tell them, or do we say, click here and let us connect you so that your colorectal screening can be scheduled for you at your convenience, right? I mean, there's breakages in terms of how the engagement happens to the delivery of care. So we do a good job of informing people and inviting them and telling them things, but I think really to be the patient-centric care, right? With zero, I'll take still Joel's thing, right? 0 miles to the patient. I think that's kind of where the opportunity is in there. And then there's more in the data, right? There's more in the unstructured data that we see beyond the EMR, which tells you more, you know, about the patient. We could go to the social determinants or environment of care as well, but those are other complexities that I think we'll see being developed and being more sensitive to the patients.
Sue, do you have a thought on this?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. So, you know, are you overthinking it? No. it's hard. I think it's very hard. And I'm at this point very much coming from a consumer perspective, and we can get into it maybe on some of the other things that we're going to talk about, but ease, accessibility, integration are all critical. And being on the other side in an organization, and my last stint at Boston Children's, I think there was an example where I asked something about scheduling and proposed something that we need to be doing, and I had people going, "Okay, you're preaching to the choir, but faculty, physicians won't buy that at this point." And it's so much about operational. The tools are there. There's lots of tools. It's operationalizing and getting everybody aligned around that strategy within the organization about what you're trying to do that's patient-centric, right? That we're going to do this, and the world has changed. And then to operationalize those changes, leveraging the tools that are available, I think is critical and a challenge for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, we talk a lot internally about the frictionless, right? Taking the friction out of the whole pathway, as Ray talked about. So, Katie, I think we have a poll question you wanted to pop up. I'm getting my stage manager in my ear here.
So are you satisfied your patient engagement strategy is generating the intended value?
I'm going to leave this up for a couple seconds, and we'll report back so that you all get to hear your own voices, at least in the form of these poll questions, and not just a couple of talking heads as we are here. But even as that is up, I'm going to keep moving forward. So, Joel, I'm going to ask you this question because I know that you've been really interested over the course of your career in self-development or development within your own organizations as well as buying. And I know that creates, we just used the word friction, but I'm going to use it again in this context, right? It creates some friction, right? So how do you manage that? How do you find the right intersections that are adding value and not adding friction?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think I'm going to start with friction. I think that's really the pivot point for me in thinking about this. And I mean, the basic definition of friction is really the resistance of one object sort of moving over the other, right? So two objects really can create friction, and I think the kind of the philosophy that many of us have now is really about, well, what are our core platforms? And in some cases, it could be the EHR. And so you're seeing people centralize all of their capabilities and features and functions to achieve those capabilities on a single platform. And I think that's a good starting point, because we want to create a frictionless experience for our providers, for our patients alike. And then I think when I think about whether we leverage something on that platform or we add something to that platform, I then ask the question, so can it deliver something that's pleasurable, that can actually do the work and not cause more friction? And really that's the basis for our sort of what we call the tech cascade. We think about what we have, what creates friction if we divert from it, if we add something to it, will it actually enhance the experience? And so, integration is critical. If we've got a third party that we want to bring in, or if we want to build something, it has to be integrated seamlessly into that workflow. And then I asked the question, how complex is it? Is it an easy win? Is it something that we can leverage almost immediately because there's an urgency, kind of like what we saw in the pandemic? I don't know about many on the call, but we were self-developing things that weren't in the market yet, and if it was in the market, it wasn't really purposed for that, and so it created friction because it was not really specifically focused on that. So we developed things like our own immunization app to process patients as they came through. We developed our own what we called we call it the wellness app, or WorkWell app, excuse me. And that was our way of asking folks, are you feeling symptoms? And then it kind of grew into, do you want to get a vaccine, or do you want to get tested? And so those are things that we think about, is it available, number one? If it's not available, and can we add it with an enhancement of the workflow rather than creating friction? Is it something that's complicated? And I think that those are sort of the things that we think about as we think about build versus buy versus mesh or merge, if you will.
Are you seeing any? Go ahead, Ray. No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna Joel. I admire Joel from an innovation perspective. I mean, what he did, during the pandemic, and I know that he and Aaron Murray were collaborating on a number of innovative ideas and things. I mean, he's talking about these coding, these low codings. I don't have that ability to do the low coding development within my organization, and so. Leaders like Joel and Aaron Murray, for example, they helped a lot of us in the pandemic with the ideas. They shared generously in there. So, he's being a little bit humble, but he's only kind of mentioned a couple of things. But he's some very cool things in the last couple of years in his innovation areas.
Thank you, Ray.
Nice. So, seeing any trends in the industry now in terms of buy, build, anything changed? Is it still the mix?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the build is in the innovation space. I think one of the changes that I hear from some people is much more openness about thinking platforms as opposed to systems, and almost a pendulum swing back to it's okay to have a lot of different vendor systems in, as long as they're integrated and you think of them from a platform perspective, compared to, when we were focusing more, I think, on, your core EHR and your core ERP. But I think for the most part, people are still with, there's a core EHR, there's a core ERP. Where do you build on that? And where are the other gaps that you need to fill, either through, niche vendor products, or if you're ahead of the market, roll your own and innovate and self-develop.
So kind of maybe innovate on the spoke part, not the hub part.
Yeah, to me, it's innovative on the edges because the vendors are covering the core stuff pretty well.
Right.
And Meg, you and I share a history at Brigham. We didn't overlap.
And as does Joel, actually. I didn't even realize that.
You were at Brigham? I thought you were
partners. Yeah, partners, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Funny. Self-development that went way back ahead of the market.
Yeah.
And made a lot of sense then.
Meg, if I might.
Katie, do we have a... Go ahead, Joel. No, you go. No,
I was just going to say that, I think it is the question, it's the $1 million question. And I find myself, sort of in that middle space right now, because I'm taking on a new role, and there's a level of application rationalization that I'm doing to try to figure out, okay, of the 600 plus applications I've got, how can I consolidate that? Mm-hmm. But then I have this philosophy that I'm trying to solve for, which is I want the users at the end of the day to have choice. So that means that I'm also sort of populating this ecosystem with applications. And so, how do you do that? And what's the platform look like where you can create guardrails where the data, which is really, to Ray's point, is core. That's what has to be liquid in all of this, right? Whether it's an analytic capability or it's a digital capability, the data is the one that you need to control and manage. And the question is do you want a mail app like an Outlook app or some other crazy other app, but it's still hitting up against that SMTP server to give you what you're looking for? It's just a different skin. And that's sort of the vision that I have is that I'd like the ecosystem to be populated with as many apps as possible, but that sort of goes counter to the rationalization piece. So the question is, can the platform help create that control so that you're really moving the asset that's most important, which is the data, and then giving folks choice on how to use that data. So I hope that makes some sense, but that's what I'm sort of grappling with now in my new roles, trying to figure out how to.
Joel, I think is so spot on as we kind of talk to some of our peers around the country and through Chime and HIMSS and other areas, and we're talking about the data liberation. Like 5-6 years ago, it was all EHR, and of course you want to leverage those investments because they're big investments. But when you look at these core systems, it's really about being able to take that data, right? Take the structured, the unstructured data, have the predictive analytics, the abstraction in there, and with, if you have the right innovation, this sounds like Joel does because he makes apps all the time, in there, you can pull and value that data in a different way that hadn't been thought of before. So I think a lot of the forward-thinking CIOs are really looking at what's happening on the data front and how do we get more predictive, how do we get more intervention, and we deliver those to enable, right, the health delivery or providing, more information to the provider so that they really need to review and approve it, right, versus kind of hunting and pecking to go find stuff, right? So I think that's kind of a new way frontier, maybe not a new way, but where we need to focus. I know we kind of got off target a bit, but that's just building on what Joel said.
No, that's why we're here, to get off target. That's what we're about.
All right.
But as I listen to you, then you do have to balance, I'm thinking, the consistency of a UI or the intuitiveness of the UI.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you sort of break the operational component of how the choice becomes a negative, I guess, right, as opposed to a positive.
Right. But if you take it back, Meg, kind of to your, if you look at the patient engagement, you ask that question around it, right, and you're able to synthesize, the socioeconomic, you're able to synthesize the clinical and other information around there, and you look at the outreach and the messaging to the patient, right? It really shapes, right? The technology works, right? But it shapes how the messaging is personalized in the experience.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Katie, we went on a whole long tangent, but you asked a question about 3 hours ago in the poll.
Yeah.
Do we have answers to that question?
So I will repeat the question. The question was, are you satisfied your patient engagement strategy is generating the intended value? So 44% of you said yes, and 56% of you said no.
Okay, then. That gives us almost absolutely no direction on which to build, but okay.
I am surprised that yes is that high. I'm surprised.
Me too.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think we could have a whole nother session, right, on defining patient engagement. That's a whole nother one of those crazy terms that we use that are so ambiguous, right? So if engagement is patient reminders, maybe you're all set, right? If it's a little deeper than that, maybe not. So more poll questions to come, no doubt.
Can I?
So let me ask. Yeah, go.
I'll make a plug for something I saw on the Well website, which was a blog that was a guide around patient engagement. And it was very well done in terms of definitions and kind of parsing out the different pieces. So, I think patient engagement has been loosely thrown around for a couple of years, but what really is it in a comprehensive strategic way? And, we all know it's more than patient reminders, right?
No, it's a good point. And let the record show that it wasn't Well that made that plug. It was Sue Schade, independent consultant. Okay. So let me ask this. I'd like each of you to answer it. If you had a megaphone, and you could hit up all the HIT companies out there, what message do you want all of us to have about how we engage with you, the things we deliver, where our focus is, whatever? You got the megaphone. Ray, I'm going to start with you. What's your message?
Oh, something good to Joel. Okay. Wow, it's a good one. I'm going to go to the interoperability. I think we can classify the vendors into space, but I am so tired of people saying, well, I have a Fire interface, or I'm an Epic App Orchard. It's this, and it's not, right? And the rubber meets the road. When you have to have a conversation with the CEO and say, I can probably integrate almost anything you want. It's a matter of time and money. But when you look at the value of it, and so many vendors are overselling the simplicity of the plug and play out there, and it causes us problems because we don't keep our promises to the business in terms of the outcomes and the change around there. So I would say, guys and gals, really have it well defined. Do not puff it up, right, in there, and you need to put the R&D into it as well.
Yep.
And the other thing I would suggest to them as well, kind of put your money where your mouth is. So if you're really confident about this stuff here and you want to pilot with us, then you need to put investment and strategy and system engineering and design tied to that so that we can launch a pilot at no risk.
Great.
Megaphone. Okay, there you go.
All right. Megaphone is passed to you, Joel.
Boy, Ray, you said all the things I wanted to say. So let me just add a couple other things. One is, you talked about design, and I think human-centered design has for me been really quite a profound impact to the way that we build and develop even the journeys that we aspire to have for our patients. And so I think that many of these organizations are starting to do that design by understanding the humanness behind this, which means that there's not necessarily a one size fits all. So really think about the solution as it relates to the different segments of the population, different systems. And there may be common threads, but there's also unique things about each system or population. And then, I would also say in this day and age where we are today, with regards to, where society is moving, with regards to design, I would really love for these vendors to really focus on equity in their design, because and for various aspects of it. One is who gets access to this, who can really leverage this, and so whether it's about equity in terms of understanding or education or socioeconomic or even race equity, those things are important in these designs, even more so than ever. And I would say that we need to consider that and how these things are developed.
Awesome, that's great.
I'll add, I'm not going to repeat what was already said. I think I'm checking off my list here. You covered a lot of things that I was going to comment on, so spot on. A couple of things aimed maybe more at the marketing people in the firms. One, Meg, you mentioned that you get questions about who's really the buyer. And there are a lot of different buyers, and that's fine. And the firms going in as a starting point and talking to those different buyers, whether it's the CMO or the CNO, or the CFO, and identifying, where to start. But to recognize that pretty early on, you got to have some kind of connection to the IT leaders, and because they're going to get hit with it eventually. They're going to get bent out of shape. If they don't know about it, they're going to put up roadblocks. So if you really want to be successful, you need to be connecting to IT early on. That's one point. Another point is being able to differentiate your product and solution from your competitors and who else is in the market. This is in my role with StarBridge Advisors. A lot of new vendors want to talk to us and tell us about their product, right? And want us to be excited about it, and be able to tell colleagues about it. And I always ask the question: who's your competitors? Who might you be winning against or losing? Because I need to have a frame of reference. If you're saying it does this, how does that compare to what's already there? And connected to that point is, there are times when I see slide decks and I just go, I have no idea what the solution is. They got all this big picture stuff and lots of buzzwords, but it's like, what does this product do? And it's very hard. You guys are nodding. It's very hard to decipher sometimes. What is the product? What's it going to solve? So those messages have to be crisp and clear, because you don't get that much time in your pitches. Right?
I found out one other thing, it's again going back and onto the cyber side, right? SOC 2, SOC 3 compliance. Sometimes once they found the right mousetrap, I will say, what mousetrap are you trying to build? To Sue's point, what are you trying to capture in here? And the business leaders may become enamored with a product, but by golly, they have horrible cybersecurity back end. And then we become the bad guys. So it's like, I really know what you want to do, but we can't accept the risk tied to it. So they need to do their proper due diligence, from a cyber perspective, because we have to produce all that documentation and audit as well.
Good point. Good point. So, Katie, I've completely lost the thread of the conversation, but I know you have another poll question. Maybe it'll be relevant to our conversation, maybe not, but why don't you go ahead with it?
Okay, so the next poll question is, what is your priority in using technology for health equity?
Okay, not too far afield.
Overcoming lack of access, using more technological innovations, more collaboration between health partners, all of the above, or not planning on using technology for health equity?
So I will ask people answer. We'll keep talking here. This is a topic near and dear to my heart, and Ray, I know to yours also. And I have alternatively heard technology to be hailed as the hero for sort of leveling the playing field, but also as the villain in creating the have and the have-not. So Ray, I'm interested in your perspective. Technology for good or for evil?
No. Well, I think technology for good. We live in a digital world, but I think we have to recognize where the digital deserts are, and I think those are, the limitations. It doesn't matter where you're in very densely packed, low-income parts of Los Angeles, or if you're in rural Middle America, right, where the critical access hospitals and community hospitals are closing for reasons, or again, an article on that came out recently. So when you look at the extensibility, right, of being able to provide care, to Joel's point, at the home where it would be, right now, from a tele perspective, we're really focusing a lot kind of on primary care, nurse advice, those type of opportunities. But if we look at technology and we're able to go from your symptom checker to launching a visit with a provider of sort, and say it's starting to progress, right? And then you have the ability to bring in a specialist as well on there versus having them dispatch. And then you can use technology if they need transportation, that if a patient is having kind of an adverse, really a problem, that you can dispatch, Uber Health, Lyft Health out to them. And then all your information flows into your local hospital, whether it's your hospital or somebody else's hospital. I mean, I think that's how we can kind of close the broken parts of the health equity. I think we've done a good job of making it more pervasive. Again, televideo, it's just normal, right? And the pay providers, the health plan providers, they're making it more ubiquitous. Retail is making it more ubiquitous around there. But I think we have kind of a way to go. So we're not there. I think there's a lot to be done there. And again, at AltaMed, we're all about culturally sensitive care, right? So people that don't speak English, don't understand English, how do they know? We got to deliver that in a HIPAA provided world, right? Not having their 10-year-old kid translating what's supposed to be happening, because we know what the protocols are supposed to be.
Right. Katie, do we have results on that poll? And then I'm coming after you, Joel and Sue, right after that. But Katie, any results yet, or too soon?
Yes. So we had 24% overcoming lack of access, 5% said using more technological innovations, 14% more collaboration between health partners, and 57% said all of the above, with 0% saying not planning on using technology for health equity.
All right. Well, that does give us some answers, doesn't it? And it's really consistent with what we've heard, particularly from the federally qualified health centers, is that, first and foremost, it's access, right? You can't make any higher level impact unless people are coming to see you or being treated in the home, right? It's got to have access first and foremost. So makes sense. Joel, comments about this?
Yeah, I think I would say that as I sort of started out with our vision at Hartford, and I think we all we share this vision, and that is, healthcare is personal. We want to make it personalized. We want it to be about that individual, and that can only be done if you have data about those individuals. And so we have to reach out to them. We have to, make these systems or design these systems to somehow get some semblance of information about them. Otherwise, they will, I think, be left out or feel like they're being left out and they don't belong. And so that's the challenge that we've got. And I know we're all on this journey of adding, fields in our registration system to collect SOGI data or DEI data, and that's one part of it certainly, but it also may not be enough, and the way that we use it may also be dangerous, right? It could skew if we don't have enough of certain types of data, and so I think this is the challenge that we have. If we want to make it a personal kind of engagement, then we have to know the patient. But in order to know the patient, we have to have information about them. And how do we gather that information so that it is, representative and therefore equitable? And so I don't have the answer to that, obviously, but it's a challenge that I'm very, very focused on, that we're very focused on, and I know many are. And then from there, I think is my point about design, that creates a foundation for us to design amazing technologies that can really be tailored to folks who wouldn't otherwise have access to it or may have a different experience than we would desire. So.
Okay. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Sue.
I'm just going to make a broad comment and say that as awful as the pandemic has been and the loss of lives and just the impact on people and society and racism that has been so much on the forefront in terms of understanding really where we are as a country in terms of race, that an awareness of the need in healthcare to address health equity issues is a positive of those two terrible things. And, if an organization is not dealing with it, they need to be. But I think that probably across the country, healthcare organizations are taking steps. They're dealing with it as they should be. And, on so many levels, whether it's the employees, workforce, patients, the community. Kudos to what Ray and Joel said in terms of what their organizations were already doing. And I know that all organizations are on this journey somehow, as they should be. Finally.
It's a tough question, Meg. There was a PBS special that was done about the inner city of Los Angeles, and the folks don't have the ability to get fresh foods, right? We tell them if they're diabetic, eat these type of things, but they're not available, right? And so folks often will go to the fast food place, get the dollar meals because that's what they can afford. It's a very tough problem to solve. It's a community-based problem to be solved as well. We can look at it from a clinical perspective and address 20%. We can address the chronic conditions, but there's 80%, right, of the socioeconomic, when you especially move down the socioeconomic ladder in terms of how it affects the adverse outcomes on health equity.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll double down from what we're seeing too, just on what Joel said, which is that, I think we collectively have to get better about collecting the data that we need so that we can understand how to target appropriate conversations even. I won't even go as far as interventions. Start with conversations, right? So it's a big challenge. And I do agree that the awareness has been heightened by the pandemic, which is great. So Katie, let's bring some other folks into this conversation. Do we have questions that have come in from the folks listening in?
Yes, and we have time for about 3 questions from the audience. So the first question is, when considering new technology for your health system, what's the best way to enlist buy-in from various departments?
Oh. Joel, I'm going to give that one to you. You've been at Bay State. You've just landed at Hartford. Maybe you're seeing differences, similarities. What's the answer to that one?
Well, the way that we approach it is what's the problem to be solved, right? What is it that is is a challenge or a friction point, and that's kind of the basis for how we then bring in technologies, whether we buy it or we build it, because otherwise it just becomes a shiny new object that may or may not fit. And so I've had the other unfortunate situation where I'm like, hey, this is a really cool AI thing or whatever, and then you try to fit it into a situation, and in fact, it's not a problem. It's a problem probably 5 years later, but certainly not at that time. So I'd say you start with, what's the problem to be solved? Find those individuals who have that problem and they experience it and they want to commit to and champion to solving it, and then you bring in, the technology to really help solve that. Oh, and by the way, they're in the middle of the problem and the technology. There's this notion of, well, how do you change process and operations? So that's also another part of it too. You have to bring operational leaders in to make sure that you're not trying to deliver something that is, is going to require really more process and operational change than just technology, kind of infusion.
So Joel talked about having it be problem focused. Are we, as a provider group of provider organizations, better at governance than we were 10 years ago? Do we know what are the top priorities of the problems facing the institution?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I said I've been in, I left Brigham late 12, and I've been in 5 organizations since, 4 of them as interims. And I am always surprised when I start at a new place that governance is not where it should be. Joel and Ray, I hope you have great governance, IT governance, or you're working on improving it, but so many organizations are just not there. And the whole point about priorities and agreement on priorities, I'll go back to one of my bosses at Brigham who said, we've never seen a good idea. What did she say? We've never seen a good idea we didn't like. I mean, you can't do everything that people want to do. You have got to make choices.
Right. Meg, since we're talking about priorities, 2 years ago, clear, right? Pandemic response, sure. Everybody in healthcare had that call to action. Yeah. We all went in that, the same path, right? So I think it was an amazing time. It was an amazing time for technology uplift, changing care, providing access. And fortunately, we're coming through now what's more of an endemic type of a situation. Again, to the losses, it's horrible. But now, again, we've kind of come back to what are our organizational priorities in there. And to Sue's point, it comes back to the governance, and it's always more than you can eat, right? And as technology leaders, we have to balance with the business and really kind of help to define the priorities. And we also be very honest in what we can and cannot deliver, right? And be courageous and show the ROIs tied to them. So I just add that a little bit to that.
Always the vexing problem, I think, forever, but hopefully we'll keep getting better at it. All right, Katie, what else do we have?
With data breaches and cyber attacks on the rise, how do you maintain security standards and minimize risk?
Well, that's an easy question. We should wrap that up very quickly. So, Ray, you're the one that you led with a security issue or a context of a security issue. What do you got?
Yeah. So I think Joel kind of. I'll say it this way, because I'm the interim assistant in my organization right now, as well as being the CIO. So because we're doing transformation in there, it's when you're kind of in that role, I'll say it this way, you sleep like a baby, you wake up every 2 hours because you're afraid that somebody's going to be breaching your organization. Okay, you kind of just put that kind of as table stakes, out there. But there are frameworks that we aspire to, right? Whether it be high trust, et cetera, and depending upon the maturity of your organization, you may or may not be in there. I think that all organizations need to have a security roadmap, right? What you're doing from the data, what you're doing from email, what you're doing from firewall, how you're scanning, right? How you're intercepting. You need to make sure that your fortress, your barriers are solid in there, and you're able to act on it. Cybersecurity is constantly changing in terms of what's happening, out there. There are some really good products that I'm not going to put anybody out there in terms that we need to look at it, but they're just good cyber hygiene, doing your pen tests, doing your phishing campaigns, The biggest vulnerability in cybersecurity is the people, not your server, right? It's the people that need to be educated. Don't click here and win $1,000, right? Because that lets something in. And it's that constant vulnerability of training and going forward. I've talked to some of the guys that when they do cybersecurity week, he runs around in a spam costume, right? Because no spam, right? So, but it's got to be kind of forefront, and people forget about that, right? It's the computer problem, it's the IT problem, right? But they need to be educated and work just as they are if they're in their own home environment.
Mm-hmm.
So for whoever asked that question, again, we won't do any commercials, but I think, as Ray said, maybe Googling high trust and getting a good overview would be a good overview to get on that side. It's complicated, definitely complicated topic. You know what? I think I'm going to call it now so that we're not rushed. I appreciate so much your generosity of time, the three of you, so thank you so much. It was fun. I'm going to feel like we should do this every month because I don't know, it just sort of worked. But it was great. And thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. I know that everyone listening also really appreciates your insight and your perspective on these things. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And stay tuned. We'll all keep learning together.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.